Skandamandalakaram Vyaktam Yena Characharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Adyanati Mirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwara Gurur Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Stavaram Jangamam Vyaptam Yat Kinchit Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Bhavaji Vyapiyat Sarvam Trilokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sarvashtuti Shiroradna Virajita Padambujaha Vedantambuja Suryoya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Chaitanya Shashvata Shanto Vyomatito Niranjanaha Bindunada Kalatita Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jnana Shakti Samarudam Tattvamala Vibhushitaha Bhukti Mukti Pradata Cha Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Aneka Janma Samprapta Karma Bandha Vidahine Atma Jnana Pradhanena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shoshanam Bhava Sindhuscha Jnapanam Sara Samparaha Guru Padodakam Samyak Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Na Guru Radhikam Tadvam Na Guru Radhikam Tapaha Tatvajnanat Param Nasti Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Manata Shri Jagannatha Madguru Shri Jagadguru Mamatma Sarva Bhutatma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Guru Radhiranadischa Guru Paramadevatam Guru Parataram Nasti Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Vishwananda Raja Rishikesha Vasa Paramadaya Mohana Krishna Vishwananda Raja Rishikesha Vasa Paramadaya Vishwananda Raja Rishikesha Vasa Paramadayala Mohana Krishna Vishwananda Raja Rishikesha Vasa Paramadayala Mohana Krishna Om Gurudeva Shri Gurudeva Jagadgurudeva Vishwananda Raja Om Gurudeva Shri Gurudeva Jagadgurudeva Vishwananda Raja Om Gurudeva Shri Gurudeva Jagadgurudeva Vishwananda Raja. Om Gurudeva Shri Gurudeva Jagadgurudeva Vishwananda Raja. Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Vishwananda Raja, Rishikesha Vasa, Paramadayala, Mohana Krishna. 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 Atma Jyoti Shri Gurudeva Swami Vishwananda Premavatara. 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 Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Vishwananda Raja, Rishikesha Vasa, Paramadayala, Mohana Krishna. Vishwananda Raja, Rishikesha Vasa, Paramadayala, Mohana Krishna. Om Gurudeva Shri Gurudeva Jagadgurudeva Vishwananda Raja. 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 Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Hari Om Narayana, Vishwananda Raja. Om Hamdara Jyotirshaya Namaha, Om Vishamaya Namaha, Om Devakarya Samudyataya Namaha, Om Sukshmatanave Namaha, Om Chinmayaya Namaha, Om Gurumurtaye Namaha, Om Sundaraya Namaha, Om Sulochanaya Namaha, Om Sumukhaya Namaha, Om Charvasaya Namaha, Om Keshavaya Namaha, Om Padmambujaya Namaha, Om Mandagamanaya Namaha, Om Chadumbaradharine Namaha, Om Ramaya Namaha, Om Mandirastapakaya Namaha, Om Shri Bhavashakaya Namaha, Om Gayatriya Jvane Namaha, Om Arpanasvikarakaya Namaha, Om Vishnu Pujakaya Namaha, Om Namo Narayana Yeti Mantropasakaya Namaha, Om Swaramayaya Namaha, Om Madhurakantaya Namaha, Om Krishna Sankirtana Lalupaya Namaha, Om Sotrapriyaya Namaha, Om Nitabashine Namaha, Om Vagmine Namaha, Om Chitrakala Visharadaya Namaha, Om Ratadharaya Namaha, Om Sadave Namaha, Om Jagarpantaya Namaha, Om Sarvalokahitaya Namaha, Om Bhaktapriyaya Namaha, Om Surdhaya Namaha, Om Anukulaya Namaha, Om Neyaya Namaha, Om Sudarshanaya Namaha, Om Bhaktavatsalaya Namaha, Om Premamurtaye Namaha, Om Shubhekshanaya Namaha, Om Pritivardhanaya Namaha, Om Swastidayakaya Namaha, Om Tarakaya Namaha, Om Anugrahaya Namaha, Om Vardhanaya Namaha, Om Architaya Namaha, Om Artaya Namaha, Om Siddhipradaya Namaha, Om Janardhanaya Namaha, Om Manoharaya Namaha, Om Mahakshaya Namaha, Om Siddheshwaraya Namaha, Om Bhasmabhushitaya Namaha, Om Atmalingaya Namaha, Om Lingachana Prasahakaya Namaha, Om Siddhi Sadanaya Namaha, Om Madhavaya Namaha, Om Amkarapasakaya Namaha, Om Sukshmaya Namaha, Om Vishokaya Namaha, Om Sadvikaya Namaha, Om Samadarshine Namaha, Om Dakshaya Namaha, Om Achintyaya Namaha, Om Niramkaraya Namaha, Om Nirmohaya Namaha, Om Avyagraya Namaha, Om Jitakrodaya Namaha, Om Vinayashilaya Namaha, Om Svavashaya Namaha, Om Kushalaya Namaha, Om Shamaya Namaha, Om Satyadharmaya Namaha, Om Nirvikalpaya Namaha, Om Viraktaya Namaha, Om Atindraya Namaha, Om Satyasandaya Namaha, Om Pavitraya Namaha, Om Madhura Swabhavaya Namaha, Om Suranandaya Namaha, Om Nandanaya Namaha, Om Prasanatmane Namaha, Om Bhaktanidaye Namaha, Om Sakshaye Namaha, Om Samatmaye Namaha, Om Sadayogine Namaha, Om Haraye Namaha, Om Sutapaya Namaha, Om Samyaya Namaha, Om Guyaya Namaha, Om Vimuktatmaya Namaha, Om Gaviraya Namaha, Om Guptaya Namaha, Om Atmaramaya Namaha, Om Srinivasaya Namaha, Om Devaya Namaha, Om Yutidharaya Namaha, Om Dhanyaya Namaha, Om Gurave Namaha, Om Duratikramaya Namaha, Om Gahanaya Namaha, Om Bhagavate Namaha, Om Harisharana Margadarshakaya Namaha, Om Kutasa Jagartakaya Namaha, Om Aviprayaya Namaha, Om Sarvamata Samatyaya Namaha, Om Shamaikata Bhavarakaya Namaha, Om Premavatara Shri Vishwananda Swami Namaha. Ato Deva Avantuno Yato Vishnur Vichakrame Prativya Sapta Damavihi Idam Vishnur Vichakrame Treda Hidade Padam Samodamasya Bhagum Sule Trini Pada Vichakrame Vishnur Gopa Ada Avyaha Tato Dharmani Dharyene Vishnu Karmani Pashyatayato Vritani Paspashe Indrasya Yujasaka Tat Vishnu Paramam Paragum Sada Pashanti Surya Dhireva Chakshura Tatam Tati Praso Vipanyavo Jagrvagum Sasamindate Vishnu Yak Paramam Param. Premavattaraya Vidmahe Sadgurudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishwananda Prachodayat. Om Premavattaraya Vidmahe Sadgurudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishwananda Prachodayat. Om Premavattaraya Vidmahe Sadgurudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishwananda Prachodayat. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvigham Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Om Bhurabhuvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurabhuvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurabhuvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yona Prachodayat. Shri Krishna Vishnu Madhusudana Ketabhare Narayana Achyuta Trivikrama Chakrapane Deityadi Sarjadhara Sridhara Vasudeva Gopala Krishna Haraye Tava Suprabhatam Shri Rukminisha Pavanasha Hare Murare Radhesha Gopesha Surupa Brahmadi Vanya Shri Dvarakashaya Vaikuntha Pate Bhuvane Kamurte Gopala Deva Haraye Tava Suprabhatam Veena Krite Kamatarupa Varaha Murte Trivikramaya Guhane Bhara Rama Rama Shri Rama Krishna Yadunandana Kalki Rupa Gopala Krishna Haraye Tava Suprabhatam Govinda Madhava Mukunda Parat Paresha Damodaracha Dharananda Kadari Shori Gopa Gopijana Sambrita Dina Bando Gopi Jana Priya Hare Tava Suprabhatam Shri Radhishayam Bhujagadi Patalpashayam Sadbhakta Sadhanashayam Ramangashayam Shri Gopa Bhama Mududalpa Sukhadishayam Gopa Vallabharaye Tava Suprabhatam Shri Kashyapatri Sukhanarada Gautamadi Brahmarshi Sangamani Sangava Bharadesho Tishtanti Devatava Darshana Bhagya Hito Gopala Shekhararaye Tava Suprabhatam Mandhara Jadi Tulasi Malakali Kadyahe Maryani Anjali Pute Samudharanti Tishtanti Vadbhavatadhara Tale Murindaha Radha Manohararaye Tava Suprabhatam Vedatrayam Padati Gautama Kanya Guyaha Yayanti Sadguna Gano Varada Savargaha Sankirtayanti Davanama Kada Visheshaha Shri Narada Rishaya Tava Suprabhatam Govardhanodharana Gopa Kishora Gopa
Gopi Janamrita Suvesha Bhavapi Pota Trailokya Mohana Sumangala Divya Deha Shri Rukminisha Varadha Tava Suprabhatam
Shri Vatsachina Saranagata Parijata Bhaktati Panjana Kripakara Dina Bando Nityanta Gayati Janapriya Divya Rupa Shri Nanda Gopadanaya Tava Suprabhatam
Padmaksha Padmamukha Padmadhara Prameyam Padmalayasrahita Padmanivasa Shauri Padmodbhavati Surasevita Pada Padmam Padmadhinatha Haraye Tava Suprabhatam
Vrindatale Viharanaya Mahendra Vandya Kandarpadarpa Haradina Sudesha Rupa Chandrananaya Sida Chandana Ligna Deva Govinda Yadavarahe Tava Suprabhatam
Shri Nanda Nandana Yashoda Kumara Dhira Mayangadhina Davichona Supushpahara Elam Buddha Susharira Rama Vihara Gopala Deva Haraye Tava Suprabhatam
Shri Vakshi Chandravati Satya Suganti Padra Shri Mitra Vindra Divasa Prabhu Putrikadyahe Ishtanti Divya Pavameta Vasevanardam Gopi Mana Priyaraye Tava Suprabhatam
Shri Krishna Akshuta Ananta Mukunda Shauri Radha Manohara Janardana Chakrapane Namani Divya Munayona Nisham Vadanti Brahmi Muhurta Samaye Tava Suprabhatam Shri Krishna Suprabhatam Ye Patanti Ahanisham Bhuri Kritan Mahapapam Shri Krishna Grahe Tukam Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam Govindamadi Purusham Tamam Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Chindamani Prakara Satmasukalpa Vriksha Lakshavardeshu Surabhirapi Palayantam Lakshmi Sahasra Shata Samrava Sevyamanam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Venum Pamantamaravinda Dalaya Taksham Bharavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpagotika Maniya Vishesha Shobham Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Alola Chandra Kalasat Anamali Vamshi Radnangaram Pranaya Keli Kalavilasam Shyamantri Bangalalidham Niyata Prakasham Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Angadi Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pashyanti Panti Galayanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vedeshu Durlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu koti shatavatsara sampragamyo vayoratapi manaso munipungavana Sobhyasti yatra padasimnya vishintyatarve Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Ekyopya saurachaidum jagadanda kotim Yachakshirasti jagadanda chayayadampaha Anantarasta paramanuchayantarastam Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Yat bhava bhavatariyo manujastateva Samprapya rupa manima sanayana gushaha Sukteyaveva nigama pratitestu vanti Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Ananda chinmaya rasa pratita vidavi Dabirya eva nicharupadaya kalavi Goloka eva nivasat yakilatma buddha Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Premanjana churita bhakti vilochanena Santa sadeva hridayeshu vilokayanti Yam shama sundaram achintya guna svarupam Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Brahmadi murti shukalani yamena dishtam Nanavatarā makaro bhuvaneshu kintu Krishna svayam samabhavat paramapumanyo Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Yasya prabha prabhavato jagadanda koti Kotishvashesha vasudhadi vibhuti vina Tattvamanishkalamanantamashesha bhutam Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Maya yasya jagadanda shatani sute Te gunatat vishaya veda vitayamana Sattva parasattva vishuddha sattvam Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Ananda chinmaya rasatmataya manasu Ya praninam pratipalam smaratam yupetya Lila itena bhuvanani jayatya jasram Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Golokanam ninijanam nitale chatasya Devi mahesha haridam ashuteshu deshu Tete prabhava nichaya vitayaschayena Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Srishti sthiti pralaya sadhana shakti reka Chaye vayasya bhuvanani vibharti durga Ichhanurupamapi yasya cha cheshtate sa Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Shiram yatadharimita vishesha yoga Sanchayate nahi tata pridegasti heto Yashambhutam api tata samubetya karya Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Dipachireva hidashantaramabhyupedya Dipayate vivrita hetu samana dharma Yastarvireva hicha vishnudaya vibhati Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Yakaranam manachale patitisma yoga Nidrammananta Jagadanda Saromakopaha Adara Shaktimabalam Yaparam Smamurtim Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasve Kanishvasita Kalamata Valamya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadandanataha Vishnur Mahansaya Yasya Kala Vishesho Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Vasvanyatashma Sakaleshu Nicheshu Techaha Iyam Kiya Prakatiya Pavidatvadatra Pramaya Esha Jagadanda Virana Karta Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yatpada Pallava Yugam Vidaya Kumbha Vandve Pranama Samaye Sadagadi Rajaha Dignam Rihantu Malalasya Jagatrayasya Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Yagnir Mahi Gangananam Umarutti Shascha Kalastadatma Manisiti Jagatrayani Yasma Pavanti Vivavanti Vishanti Amja Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Raja Samasta Suramurti Rashesha Tejaha Yasyaknaya Pramati Samrita Kala Chakro Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Dharmota Papa Nichaya Shutaya Svabamsi Kamadi Kiti Padaga Vadayascha Jivaha Yadatta Matra Vivapa Prakata Prabhava Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yaspindra Gopamata Vindra Mahosva Karma Bandhana Rupa Parabhajamanata Noti Karmani Nirdhati Kintu Bhakti Bhajam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayani Viti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Senya Bhavahe Sanchityatasya Sadishim Tamura Purete Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Nadiradir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Om Agnarantimirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Good morning, everybody. So this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam is taken from Canto 3, Chapter 25, verse 18. Gnana Vairagya Yuktina Bhakti Yuktina Chatmana Pariprishyati Udasinam Prakritim Chahato Chasam. Which means, in that position of self-realization, by practice of knowledge and renunciation in devotional service, one sees everything in the right perspective. He becomes indifferent to material existence, and the material influence acts less powerfully upon him. In this section, this part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, is one of the verses where the Lord, who was manifested as Kapila Muni is having a conversation with his mother Devahuti and also Lord Maitreya. And Kapila Muni is answering all the questions about how to attain the purpose from which they have manifested, which they have incarnated, and how to extricate themselves, how to free themselves from this material bondage by practicing devotional service. And I chose this verse today since I felt that I wanted to talk about perspective. Perspective is a very interesting thing, because the perspective one can have about life is completely tied into one's experience of life. They go often hand in hand. And during my life, I've had some really dramatic changes in perspective, challenged the way that I have viewed myself or understood life to be, about what humans are capable of, and how we bind and limit ourselves through changing our perspective. So one of these things that has the ability to really limit our perspective of life is belief. It's an incredible factor that limits or grants us freedom to whether we have a greater or more restricted perspective of life and who we are. I've seen how it can limit our experience of life when we believe ourselves to be much less than what we actually are. I've seen that for some people who choose to fix themselves into a limiting belief, how they were denying themselves the possibility for growth and change and for a greater perspective in life. There was one person that I knew that he believed that he was not worthy of anything good. For this reason, he didn't take the opportunities to receive the blessing that life was offering for him. He didn't believe that he was worthy to receive something of great value. So he didn't make himself available for it. He didn't open to himself to the good things of life. He allowed himself to wallow in that state of lack of self-worth. Caught in that restriction of lack of self-worth, life became quite uncomfortable, and he became bitter. He used to look at other people and complain about what they had in life that he didn't have. So life was a struggle. I've seen friends who had this belief that their only family was their ancestral family, their mother, their father, their siblings. And when they found their path of spirituality, people who thought the same way that they did, felt the same way that they did, had a similar perspective on life as they did, they realized, wow, I have a spiritual family. And this family that I found now seems much more family-like than the family I used to have, or the family, my ancestral family. I didn't know that I could have another family. My perspective of family has changed. And the outcome was that they could connect much deeper. They could resonate with their spiritual family much deeper. They could share thoughts that they couldn't share with their ancestral family. Another person I knew when I worked as a therapist many years ago, she believed that she was a victim of life. Life was out to get her. She had many people in her life that she experienced that were taking advantage of her. She complained that people were out to get her, but she didn't do anything about it. When we looked at why this could be, this perspective of life, it was rooted into her childhood relationship with her father. And when she saw this perspective was projected onto all the men that came into her life, suddenly her perspective of life changed. She realized that she could choose to change this perspective. When she did that, suddenly there was a radical change in her life. She realized that she had responsibility of how she perceived people. Knowing that came a great power, and she became very positive. And due to that positivity of choosing to change that perspective, her experience of life radically changed. What you believe you can do as a human being, what you are capable of manifesting, is dependent on what you believe yourself to be. What you believe is you are capable of. Again, this is dependent on your experience, and it is your perspective of yourself and other people. Many years ago when I was very much into martial arts, I trained each week and I really enjoyed Wing Chun Kung Fu. I was really into this big time. For me, it was an art, it was a science, and it really thrilled me. I loved it. The training that I underwent led me to believe that what humans are capable of is something much greater than what our senses can perceive. I initially believed that humans can only move so fast, that they cannot perform the miraculous. It was then that that belief was actually broken completely. I saw my instructor move faster than what the eye can see. You could literally not see him move. He just used to move and that was it. Like he was there, moved. You didn't see it. They even took one experiment. They took like an empty, like a Evian bottle, these big 2-liter ones, put a hand there, and then suddenly the hand was there, and the bottle was just sliced in half using the hands. And they were trying to record it with high-speed photography. The photos only got here and there. In between it, the hand was moving too fast. They clocked it was about nearly 200 kilometers an hour. So that belief that I had that there are certain limitations on the body was broken. I had a new perspective. There was one boy who always played with salamanders. These are the little kind of like, I don't know if they're reptilian or amphibian, let's say, yeah. And he used to play with these when he was a kid. And these animals, sometimes if they have their arms cut off or their tail cut off, they can regrow them. So this kid, he had an accident, and unfortunately he lost his arm. And when people lose their arms or their legs, that's it. They get maybe a prosthetic one or something. But this child was different. Because he'd grown up playing with salamanders, and when they lost their arms or their legs, they just regrew them, he started regrowing his arm. And he regrew it from the up near the shoulder all the way down, and it took him about 2 years to completely regrow his arm. Because that's what he believed. That was his perspective. Salamanders regrow their arms, so I guess humans do too. He didn't know that this was not normal. The doctor's perspective of healing, the capacity for humans to heal, completely radically changed. Because his perspective was just, that's what he believed. Very interesting. A friend of mine, Patricia, she once had an out-of-body experience. She was upstairs, sitting on her bed, and she was just taking off her shoes. Her husband was downstairs making the tea. Like in England, we make tea often, many times a day. So as he was making the tea, he was clinking, ding, 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 the teaspoon in the teacup. So she could hear this, but she was at the same time suddenly, as well as being in her body, she was out of her body, flying very fast over the earth. And she didn't know where she was, so as she went down, she was a geography teacher, she could see herself moving over the boot of Italy. So she was flying up the coast of Italy, and then she was over Rome. So when time came for her to die, she wasn't frightened, because she knew that she wasn't this body. Her perspective of who she was had changed. I believe that much was possible for humans from my experience with martial arts, and then again, my perspective of myself radically changed. I started waking up at night. The problem was that when I was waking up, I didn't have a human body. I was not waking up in this body. I started to wake up in space. Sometimes I'd wake up in this solar system. Sometimes I'd wake up very, very far away from this solar system. But as I would wake up, I would look around. I could see all the stars, the positioning of the stars, the planets, the cosmos, the different galaxies. And sometimes I'd wake up and I'd be just floating above the moon, several hundred kilometers. I would see the whole moon perfectly, all the craters in the moon, where the meteors had impacted, and they'd made these lines of debris from the impact site. And there was a deep silence when waking up and just being present there. One night I woke up standing on the edge of the universe, looking out into a vast, vast, vast space. It was so vast, much, much more vast than this universe that we experience. And that perspective of who I was changed radically. What happened when I was looking out into that vast, vast space, suddenly, whilst I was awake, then the mind came in, that I, that sense of I, and it just disappeared within a second, like a second and a half. It was gone. I woke up in a rush. My perspective of who we are as human beings, limited to this tiny little planet, no longer held true for me anymore. I realized that this mind is a limited tool. This mind is so limited, it doesn't have the capacity to hold the vastness of life. Not possible. I wanted to understand what these experiences meant. Why am I having these experiences? I felt much more at home in deep, deep space than here on this little planet. I knew that I wasn't this body. I knew that this body was a tiny, tiny little vessel with this limited lens we call a mind. And I experienced something that was not the perspective of what we normally have. It was something else, something more authentic and genuine. My perspective of life, of who we are really, changed. There was a pivotal shift. And I knew that who I was truly had nothing to do with the body, has nothing to do with the mind. But how often, every day, we are limited to our perspective. He is wrong, I am right. We have a thought, somebody presses a button, whatever it might be. People can press our buttons all the time. And we have this belief about somebody, a perspective about something. That's just because we're looking through this filter called the mind. It's extremely limited. One day flying back from Switzerland over London, I flew over London. I'd never flown over this part of London before from this direction. So as I was flying over London, I knew London very well, lived there for 10 years. I flew over Hyde Park and South Kensington. As I looked down, I realized, oh my God, that's where I used to live. For 3 years of my life, I lived in that tiny little area. I had a different perspective. I realized, oh wow. You live so many years of your life in just this little area of the world. How restricted it is. When I met Guruji for the first time, I felt that incredible divine love. And it was then that I knew that I'd found what I was looking for in life. My questions to life, what is the purpose of life? Why am I here? It was all suddenly answered in him. Again, my perspective of life changed. What I wanted to share is the power of perspective. Where we decide to stand, what we choose to believe, what thoughts, what habits, all help to define our perspective on life. The path of bhakti that we have been on has been created, it's been tested, it's been trialed, and it's been shown that it can radically change your perspective of who you believe yourself to be and the purpose of life and why we're all here. This is what Guruji is trying to get us to experience, that radical change in perspective. It's not something new, but something eternal. It's so eternal, it's the oldest thing out there. And that's the reality of the soul. The relationship of the soul to the Supreme Being. It's the perspective that Guruji would like us to have. Not only a guru-disciple relationship, but to have that real perspective of the soul and its eternal relationship to the Lord. So to transform oneself, everything that Guruji does is about transformation. To transform oneself means to take that change in perspective, to step once and forever away from the limitation of the mind, to see purely through that filter of the mind, which is extremely limited, and to come into the depth of the cosmic self, of the eternal self, and to drown that mind into the love of the Supreme Lord. That's the only way that the mind is truly going to surrender. And when you're in love, you go, oh, darling. But as you come into that supreme love from the Lord, it's so easy for the mind to surrender because you're in that state of love. Love is the key through which all that surrender happens. Without the love, it's very hard to surrender. But in the presence of that love, that's when the mind really begins to surrender itself. And we're all here for that change in perspective. But will we reach that? Only if we're prepared to let go completely of what tethers us to our current perspective of life, which is mostly the mind, the active mind. So we have to change our habits, our thoughts, our preferences, our beliefs. And if we can do that, it's a radical change in that perspective of who we truly are. Jai Gurudev.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha. Hiranyakashipurvakshaha.
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha.
Shilatankanakalaye.
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 Ito narasimha parato narasimho.
Ito narasimho parato narasimho.
Ito narasimha parato narasimho.
Ito narasimho parato narasimho.
Yato yato yamitato narasimho.
Yato yato yamitato narasimho.
Yato yato yamitato narasimho.
Yato yato yamitato narasimho.
Bahir narasimho hridaye narasimho.
Bahir narasimho hridaye narasimho.
Bahir narasimho hridaye narasimho.
Bahir narasimho hridaye narasimho.
Narasimha madim sharanam prapadye.
Narasimha madim sharanam prapadye.
Narasimha madim sharanam prapadye.
Narasimha madim sharanam prapadye.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Praladaladaine.
Praladaladaine.
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha.
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha.
Shilat Tankana Kalaye
Shila Tankana Kalaye
Ito Narasimha Parato Narasimho
Ito Narasimho Parato Narasimho
Yato Yato Yamitato Narasimho
Yato Yato Yamitato Narasimho
Bahi Narasimho Radaye Narasimho
Bahi Narasimho Hidaye Narasimho
Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapadye
Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapadye
Davakara Kamalavare Nakama Bhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringam Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare
Avakara Kamalavare Nakama Bhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringam Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare
Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare
Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare
Jaya Narasimhadev 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 Jaya Narasimhadev
Jaya Narasimhadev 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 Jaya Narasimhadev
Oh Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Bhakta Swarupa Jaya Prahlad Maharaj
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Bhakta Swarupa Jaya Prahlad Maharaj
Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev
Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev
Sri Vishwananda Gurudev 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 Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
Sri Vishwananda Gurudev 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 Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
Oh Gurudev Gurudev Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
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 Gurudev Gurudev Gurudev Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
Vishwananda Gurudev 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 Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
Sri Vishwananda Gurudev 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 Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
Vishwananda Gurudev 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 Sri Vishwananda Gurudev
Gurudev Gurudev Gurudev Sri Vishwananda Gurudev Shri Vitalam Giridhari Parabrahmane Namaha Shri
Vitala Giridhari Parabrahmane Namaha
Shri Vitalam Giridhari
Shri Vitala Giridhare Parabrahmane Namaha
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 Shri Vitala Giridhare Parabrahmane Namaha Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Yatindraya Karunakaraya Mangala Mangala Me
Yatindraya Karunakaraya Mangala Mangala Me
Prapartidalme Karataya Mangala Mangala Me
Prapatidharme Karataya Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Shaligrama Pratishtitaya Mangala Mangala Me
Saligrama Pratishtitaya Mangala Mangala Me
Tridandadharini Godagrachaya Mangala Mangala Me
Vedantadharine Godagrachaya Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Range Saken Karyarataya Mangala Mangala Me
Range Saken Karyarataya Mangala Mangala Me
Mananataya Darine Daraya Mangala Mangala Me
Mananataya Darine Daraya Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Ramanuja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me Yatiraja Ramanuja Mangala Mangala Me
Om Jai Jagadisha Hare Swami Jai Jagadisha Hare Bhata Janon Ke Santata Dasa Janon Ke Santata Jana Me Dura Kare Om Jai Jagadisha Hare Yo Jave Phala Pave Dukha Vinase Manaka Swami Dukha Vinase Manaka Sukha Sampati Gara Ave Sukha Sampati Gara Ave Kashtami Te Tanaka Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare Mata Pita Tuma Mere Sharanaga Humen Kisaki Swami Sharanaga Humen Kisaki Tuma Vina Aurana Duja Tuma Vina Aurana Duja Asakarumen Kisaki Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare Tuma Purana Paramatma Tuma Antarayami Swami Tuma Antarayami Para Brahma Parameshvara Para Brahma Parameshvara Tuma Sabake Swami Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare Tuma Karuna Te Sagar Tuma Palana Karata Swami Tuma Palana Karata Main Sevaka Tuma Swami Main Sevaka Tuma Swami Kripa Karo Bharata Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare Tuma ho eka gochara Sabake Pranapati Swami Sabake Pranapati Kisa Vidhi Milon Dayamaya Kisa Vidhi Milon Dayamaya Tuma Komen Kumati Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare Dina Bandhu Dukharta Tumara Shaka Mere Swami Tumara Shaka Mere Karuna Hata Badao Karuna Hata Badao Sharana Padate Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare Vishaya Vikara Vitao Paparo Deva Swami Paparo Deva Shraddha Bhakti Badao Shraddha Prema Badao Santana Ki Seva Om Jaya Jagadisha
Jagadisha Hare. Dana mana dana sabha hai tera, Swami sabha kuch hai tera, Swami sabha kuch hai tera. Tera tujhko arpan, tera tujhko arpan, kya lage mera. Om Jayo Jagadisha Hare, Om Jayo Jagadisha Hare, Swami Jayo Jagadisha Hare. Bhakta janon ke sankata, dasa janon ke sankata, jana me dura kare. Om Jayo Jagadisha Hare. Mana chakra rakhogi, Nidhari lala chakra rakhogi, Nidhari lala chakra rakhogi, Nidhari lala chakra rakhogi. Mana chakra rakhogi, Nidhari lala chakra rakhogi, Nidhari lala chakra rakhogi, Nidhari lala chakra rakhogi. Chakra ko, chakra ko, chakra ko ji. Chakra ko, chakra ko, chakra ko ji. Mane chakra ko ji. Virai lala chakra ko ji. Shama mane chakra ko ji. Virai lala chakra ko ji. Govinda mane chakra ko ji. Virai lala chakra ko ji. Virai lala chakra ko ji. Virai lala chakra ko ji. Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva, tvameva bandhuscha sakha tvameva, tvameva vidya dravinam tvameva, tvameva sarvam mama deva deva, tvameva sarvam mama deva deva. Govinda. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.
प्रेम से बोलो लक्ष्मी नारायण भगवान की
जय।
प्रेम से बोलो श्री भूतभृतेश्वर नरसिम्हा भगवान की
जय।
प्रेम से बोलो श्री हरे कृष्ण कन्हैया लाल की
जय।
प्रेम से बोलो अवतार क्रिया बाबा जी की
जय।
प्रेम से बोलो श्री मुरुजाचार्य की
जय।
प्रेम से बोलो सद्गुरुदेवा श्री स्वामी विश्वानंदा महाप्रभु की
जय।
Shri Krishnaya Govindaya Gopi Jana Vallabhaya Paraya Paramapurushaya Parakarma Mantayanga Tantra Aushadasha Shastrani Samraya Samraya Nichor Mochaya Mochaya Om Namo Bhagavate Mahasudarshanaya Diti Jvalapritaya Savanik Shubhanahum Pat Parishmahe Parabrahmane Paramjyotishe Svaha. Om Shanti 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 Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe. Sham Venkatamana Gonda,
Govinda.
Gopika Jivasmanam Gonda,
Govinda.
Bhaktavatsala Gonda,
Govinda.
Pundalika Varade,
Hare Rama.
Eknath Namdev,
Tukaram.
Pandharinath Maharaj ki
Jai.
Samasta Bhakta Mandali ki
Jai.
Alvar Empunumanar Thiruvalkale Sharana